The year was 2473. Eloria, the floating city of the Solari, drifted gracefully through the high-altitude seas of Lysara. From below, it appeared as a glittering jewel suspended between ocean and sky, its crystalline structures capturing and refracting the amber light of the distant sun. But as with many beautiful things, its splendor masked a darker truth. In the shadows beneath the city's grandeur, Valera sat alone in her dimly lit chamber. The room, carved from the underbelly of Eloria's foundation stone, was sparse and cold. The only source of illumination came from the faint blue glow of her skin, the mark that had condemned her to this isolation. Unlike the pure alabaster luminescence of other Solari, Valera's light pulsed with threads of crimson, the blood mark, they called it. An aberration, a sign of impurity. The religious leaders of the sacred energy claimed it was evidence of corruption, while the scientific committee viewed her as a fascinating anomaly, neither seeing her as a person deserving of dignity. Valera pressed her palm against the cool stone wall, feeling the subtle vibrations of the city above. She closed her eyes, listening to the distant hum of sacred energy that powered Eloria and sustained her people. Even here, in her exile, she could sense its flow, perhaps more acutely than those who walked freely in the sunlight. A soft chime interrupted her meditation. The door to her chamber slid open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the corridor's harsh light. "May I come in?" The voice was gentle, accented with the distinctive cadence of human speech. Valera squinted, her eyes unaccustomed to brightness. "You're early today, Ethan." Dr. Ethan Carter stepped into the room, his research equipment hovering behind him on a gravity plate. Unlike most humans who visited Eloria, he wore simplified clothing that mimicked Solari attire, a gesture of respect that hadn't gone unnoticed by Valera. "The committee granted me extra research time," he explained, setting up his instruments with practiced efficiency. Apparently, they're eager for progress on understanding Solari bioenergetics. Valera gave a bitter laugh. "You mean they're eager to understand why I'm broken?" Ethan paused, his dark eyes meeting her luminescent ones. "You're not broken, Valera. You're different. And in my experience, different often means special." She looked away, uncomfortable with his kindness. In the 3 months since his arrival on Eloria, as part of the Earth-Lysara exchange program, Dr. Ethan Carter had shown her more compassion than she'd experienced in years among her own kind. "The High Priest Arthon has called for another purification ceremony tomorrow," she said quietly. "They'll be drawing citywide energy for it." Ethan frowned, adjusting the settings on his scanner. "That's the 3rd this month. The tension between the Church of Sacred Energy and the Scientific Committee seems to be escalating." "It always does before the convergence," Valera replied, extending her arm as Ethan began his regular readings of her bioenergetic patterns. "When the twin moons align, power struggles intensify. It's been this way for generations." As the scanner hummed over her skin, Valera studied Ethan's face. His features, so different from the ethereal symmetry of the Solari, held a warmth that transcended species. His dark hair, streaked with premature silver, fell across his forehead as he concentrated. She wondered, not for the first time, what had drawn this brilliant human scientist to the distant Lysara system, so far from his home. "Your readings are stronger today," he noted, eyes fixed on his datapad. "The crimson energy patterns have stabilized since last week." Before she could respond, a thunderous boom shook the chamber, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Ethan steadied himself against the wall as Valera rose to her feet, her body tensing. "That came from the upper districts," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "The Temple District." Ethan's communication device chirped urgently. He activated it, and a holographic image of a woman with severe features and silver-streaked hair appeared. "Dr. Carter," the woman spoke sharply, "your presence is required immediately in Observation Deck 7. There's been an incident." "I'm in the middle of crucial measurements, Dr. Marr," Ethan replied, glancing at Vayalira. "This takes precedence," Dr. Celine Marr insisted. "The committee needs your human perspective on what's happening. The religious faction is making a move we didn't anticipate." The transmission ended abruptly. Ethan gathered his equipment with hurried movements. "I should go," he said apologetically, "but I'll return as soon as I can. Stay here where it's safe." Vayalira nodded, though a sense of foreboding settled in her chest. "Be careful. When the priests are agitated, no place in Eloria is truly safe, especially not for outsiders." After Ethan departed, Vayalira paced her small chamber, the crimson threads in her skin pulsing more rapidly with her anxiety. Something felt wrong, more wrong than usual. The vibrations through the stone had changed frequency, becoming more erratic. Unable to contain her restlessness, she moved to the small viewing port that offered her only glimpse of the outside world. Through its distorted crystal, she could see a portion of Eloria's underbelly and the swirling mists of the high-altitude sea below. But today, something else caught her eye. A procession of light moving along the underside of the city. Priests, 7 of them, their ceremonial robes billowing in the high winds as they traversed a maintenance path rarely used, and they were heading directly toward her sector. Vayalira's heart raced. In all her years of exile, the priests had never come to her chamber. They delegated her management to lower acolytes, or, more recently, to the scientific committee. The presence of a full procession could only mean one thing: something had changed in her status. She retreated from the viewing port, weighing her options. There was nowhere to hide in the small chamber, and the single exit would surely be blocked by the approaching priests. For a moment, she considered reaching out to Ethan through the emergency communication device he'd given her, but decided against it. Whatever was happening, drawing him back into danger wouldn't help either of them. Instead, she centered herself, drawing on the meditative practices she'd developed during her long isolation. If confrontation was inevitable, she would face it with dignity. The door to her chamber slid open without a chime or warning. High Priest Arthon stood in the entrance, his tall frame dominating the space. Unlike the warm glow of most Selari, his luminescence was a cold, stark white that cast harsh shadows across his angular features. 6 lesser priests flanked him, their expressions uniformly solemn. "Vayalira, marked one," Arthon intoned, his voice carrying the formal resonance used in Selari ceremonies. "The time of observation has ended." She straightened her posture, refusing to cower. "I wasn't aware there was a scheduled end to my containment." Arthon's mouth tightened. The sacred energy speaks through signs and portents. Today, during the morning communion, the energy manifested a clear directive. Your presence in Eloria can no longer be tolerated. A chill ran through Vayalira's body. "You're executing me without trial or defense." One of the lesser priests shifted uncomfortably, but Arthon remained impassive. "Not execution, expulsion. You will be taken to the dead zone at the edge of our territory and released from our community permanently." His gaze flicked over her glowing skin with poorly concealed disgust. "Whatever fate befalls you there is between you and the energies you have chosen to embrace." "Chosen?" Vayalira's voice rose, a lifetime of suppressed anger suddenly threatening to break through. "I never chose this mark." "Silence," Arthon commanded. "The decision is made. The scientific committee has been informed and has withdrawn their protection in light of today's energy manifestation. Even your human advocate cannot interfere with the sacred will." 2 priests moved forward, energy restraints hovering between their hands. Vayalira stepped back, her crimson light flaring defensively. "Don't touch me," she warned, feeling something stir within her, something beyond the familiar energies of her Solari heritage. It was hot and primal, responding to her fear. Arthon raised his hand, and a pulse of white energy shot from his palm, enveloping Violira in a containment field. The sensation was like being submerged in ice water, shocking and painful. "Your corruption spreads," Arthon observed coldly as the crimson light in her veins pulsed against his restraint. "We act not a moment too soon." As the priests surrounded her, Violira caught a glimpse of her reflection in the viewing port's crystal. For a split second, her eyes had flashed with an ancient, terrible power, something that belonged neither to the Solari nor to any species she knew. Then the energy restraints closed around her, and darkness claimed her consciousness. Ethan Carter raced through the crowded corridors of Eloria's scientific district, pushing past groups of agitated Solari citizens. The observation deck had been chaotic, scientists and officials arguing heatedly about the morning's unprecedented energy fluctuation in the temple. Some claimed it was a natural phenomenon. Others insisted it was manufactured by Arthon to consolidate power. But Ethan's concerns lay elsewhere. The moment he'd heard that the fluctuation had been interpreted as a sign against impurity in the city, his thoughts had flown to Violira. He'd slipped away from the observation deck while Dr. Marr was distracted, determined to ensure Violira's safety. As he approached the lower levels, the crowd thinned. Few Solari ventured to the Undercity by choice. He rounded the final corner to Violira's sector and froze. The door to her chamber stood open, and the room beyond was empty. "Violira," he called, stepping inside. The space held the lingering chill of recent energy use, powerful energy, ceremonial in nature. Ethan activated his scanner, confirming his suspicions. High Priest Arthon had been here, along with several other energy signatures consistent with the temple's elite. "No, no, no," he muttered, searching for any clue to where they might have taken her. His eyes fell on a small object near the viewing port, a delicate crystalline figurine Violira had carved during her confinement. It was one of her few possessions, depicting two intertwined energy forms. She would never have left it behind willingly. Ethan pocketed the figurine and activated his communication device, attempting to reach Dr. Marr. After several tense moments, her image appeared. "This is not a good time, Dr. Carter," she said tersely. "They've taken Violira," Ethan cut in. "Where would Arthon take someone for expulsion from the city?" Celine's expression shifted, surprise briefly overriding her usual control. "Expulsion? That's not possible. The agreement between the committee and the temple has clearly been broken," Ethan interrupted. "Her chamber is empty, and there are traces of temple energy signatures everywhere. Please, Dr. Marr, whatever political game is being played, Violira's life is at stake." Celine hesitated, conflict evident in her eyes. Finally, she sighed. "The dead zone. It's the only place they would consider suitable for ceremonial expulsion. But Carter," her voice softened slightly, "if they've truly decided to expel her, interfering would violate our non-intervention protocols with Solari religious practices." "I'm not asking for committee intervention," Ethan replied grimly. "I'm asking for directions." After a pause, Dr. Marr sent coordinates to his device. "The northeastern edge of the city. There's a maintenance airlock that leads to an external platform, but you'll never reach it in time on foot. Then I'll need a skimmer." "That would be direct interference with—" "Celine," Ethan said, using her first name for the first time since their acquaintance began. "I know you see her as a research subject, but she's a person. No one deserves to be abandoned to die for being different." The line went silent for so long that Ethan thought the connection had failed. Then, quietly, "Access Bay 12, Section 4, my personal skimmer is registered to recognize your biometrics. Don't make me regret this, Ethan." The transmission ended. Ethan wasted no time, sprinting toward the indicated location. As he ran, he tried not to think about what would happen to Veilira in the dead zone, an area notorious for its lack of the sacred energy that all Solari needed to survive. Without it, she would weaken rapidly and, within days, perish. The northeastern edge of Eloria was seldom visited by the city's inhabitants. Unlike the gleaming spires and floating gardens of the central districts, this region was utilitarian and stark. Maintenance systems, waste processing units, and emergency equipment dominated the architecture. As Arthon's procession marched via Lyra along a narrow external walkway, biting winds tore at her simple garments. Below, the endless sea of clouds stretched to the horizon, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of the actual ocean surface thousands of feet below. The sight, normally awe-inspiring, now filled her with dread. Soon, she would be alone in this hostile environment, cut off from the energy that sustained her. They reached a small platform extending over the abyss. A simple barrier separated it from the emptiness beyond, its force field shimmering faintly in the late afternoon light. Arthon positioned himself at the center of the platform, his robes billowing dramatically around him. The 6 lesser priests arranged themselves in a circle, leaving Veilira contained in their midst. "Hear me, servants of the sacred energy," Arthon began, his voice carried and amplified by the winds. "We stand at the threshold between purity and corruption, between the blessed community and the wilderness beyond." Veilira struggled against her energetic bonds, but they only tightened in response. The more she fought, the more the crimson light within her pulsed and strained against her skin. "For 20 cycles we have harbored this marked one among us," Arthon continued. "We have studied her aberration, seeking understanding. But today, the sacred energy has spoken clearly. The corruption she carries is not to be understood, it is to be expelled." One by one, the priests began to chant, their voices harmonizing in ancient Solari cadences that resonated with the energy flowing through the city. With each phrase, Veilira felt her connection to Eloria's power grid weakening, the familiar sustenance that had nourished her since birth being systematically withdrawn. "Wait!" she gasped, a genuine fear gripping her as she felt her strength ebbing. "You can't do this. The scientific committee has conceded to the will of the sacred energy," Arthon interrupted. "Even now, they study the morning's manifestation, unable to deny its significance." As the chanting intensified, Veilira's knees buckled. The crimson light within her veins flickered erratically, like a flame struggling against a strong wind. She had always known her position in Solari society was precarious, but she had never truly believed they would cast her out to die. Despite years of mistreatment, some part of her had clung to the hope that her people would eventually accept her. That hope now died as Arthon raised his hands for the final invocation. "By the power vested in me as High Priest of the sacred energy, I sever your connection to our collective life force. I release you to the void, marked one. May whatever corrupt energy you harbor sustain you in your exile." A searing pain tore through Veilira as her biological link to Aeloria's energy grid was forcibly broken. She screamed, the sound lost in the howling wind. Her body convulsed, the crimson light flaring brilliantly before dimming to a dangerous flicker. Through a haze of agony, she heard the barrier's force field deactivate. Rough hands gripped her shoulders, pushing her toward the edge of the platform. With her last conscious thought, Veilira wondered if Ethan would somehow learn of her fate, or if he would simply find her chamber empty and eventually forget the strange, marked Solari who had briefly been part of his research. Then she was falling, the wind rushing past her as Aeloria receded above. The energy restraints dissolved, no longer necessary as gravity claimed her. As consciousness faded, the crimson light within her dimmed to near extinction. She didn't feel the impact when her body hit the outcropping of rock that protruded from the cloud layer, a small, barren island in the sea of mist. Nor did she sense the approach of the human skimmer that had tracked her fall, its pilot pushing the craft beyond safe speeds in a desperate race against time. Ethan Carter had never piloted a Solari skimmer before today, and certainly never under such dire circumstances. The sleek vessel responded to his mental commands with a sensitivity that made Earth technology seem primitive by comparison. But its unfamiliar controls had cost him precious minutes as he learned to navigate. By the time he'd located the northeastern platform, the expulsion ceremony was already concluding. From a distance, he had watched in horror as Violira's body was pushed from the edge, plummeting toward the endless clouds below. Without hesitation, he had sent the skimmer into a steep dive, tracking her fall with the craft's sensors. Now, kneeling beside her unconscious form on the rocky outcropping, Ethan worked with frantic precision. His medical scanner showed her life signs fading rapidly, the biological equivalent of a power system shutting down. Without connection to Eloria's energy grid, her cellular functions were beginning to fail. "Come on, Valira," he muttered, preparing an emergency bioelectric infuser from his field kit. The device, designed for human physiology, would need significant modification to work on a Solari. As he calibrated the settings, Ethan glanced up at Eloria floating above them, its crystalline structures catching the light of the setting sun. From this distance, it looked peaceful and beautiful, a cruel contrast to the violence it had just sanctioned. The infuser beeped, indicating readiness. Ethan hesitated only briefly before placing the device against Violira's chest, directly over the central node where Solari concentrated their energy processing. He activated it, sending a carefully modulated pulse through her system. Violira's body arched, the crimson light in her veins briefly intensifying before fading again. Ethan adjusted the settings and tried once more, increasing the power. "Please work," he whispered, more prayer than scientific statement. On the third attempt, Violira gasped, her eyes flying open. For a moment, they glowed with an intense crimson light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her, something ancient and powerful. Then they cleared, returning to their normal luminescent blue with crimson flecks. "Ethan," she croaked, her voice barely audible over the wind. Relief flooded through him. "I'm here. You're safe now." She tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan. "They cut me off from the grid. I won't survive long." "You will," Ethan assured her, helping her into a sitting position. "The infuser is stabilizing your energy levels temporarily. It's not a permanent solution, but it gives us time to figure something out." Violira looked around, taking in their precarious position on the small, rocky outcropping surrounded by clouds. "Where are we?" "About 200 meters below Eloria. You were lucky, or perhaps something guided your fall. This is the only solid ground for miles." Ethan gestured to the skimmer parked nearby. "We need to get you somewhere safer, somewhere I can properly help you." "There's nowhere in Eloria I can go now," Violira said bitterly. "Even if we could return, I've been formally expelled. My biological connection to the city's energy has been severed." Ethan helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved toward the skimmer. "Not Eloria. Then my research station on the mainland. It's stocked with enough equipment that I might be able to develop a synthetic energy source for you." Violira hesitated, looking up at the floating city that had been her prison and her home. "I've never been to the surface. No Solari has, for generations. The ancient texts say it's toxic, corrupted." "It's not," Ethan said gently. "That's just another myth perpetuated to keep control. The surface is beautiful, Valira, different from Eloria, but very much alive." She allowed him to help her into the skimmer, her movements weak and uncoordinated, as Ethan took the controls, setting a course for the distant mainland. Valera gazed back at Aloria one last time. "They would have let me die," she said quietly, the reality of her people's rejection finally sinking in completely. Ethan's hands tightened on the controls. "But they didn't succeed, and now you have a chance at something they never imagined possible. Freedom." As the skimmer descended through the cloud layer toward the world below, Valera felt something stirring within her, not just the crimson energy that had marked her as different, but a new sensation, hope. The journey to Ethan's research station took nearly 3 hours, during which Valera drifted in and out of consciousness. The infuser continued to provide her with temporary energy, but its effect was diminishing. By the time the skimmer touched down on the landing pad beside a modest structure nestled in a coastal forest, her condition had deteriorated significantly. "Stay with me," Ethan urged as he carried her from the craft into the station. The building, a blend of Earth and Lysaran architecture, was designed to accommodate both human and Solari physiology. As the primary outpost for human research on the planet, it contained medical equipment and energy generators that Ethan hoped would keep Valera alive until a more permanent solution could be found. He placed her on a diagnostic bed in the main laboratory, quickly activating the station's systems. Holographic displays sprang to life around them, showing Valera's rapidly declining bioenergetic patterns. "Your cellular structure is destabilizing without the specific frequency of Aloria's energy grid," Ethan explained, working rapidly to connect her to the station's power system. "I'm going to attempt to synthesize a compatible energy source, but it won't be exact." Valera watched him through half-lidded eyes, her normally luminescent skin now dull and faded. "Why are you doing this, Ethan? Risking everything for someone you barely know?" His hands paused briefly over the controls. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one deserves to be discarded for being different." He met her gaze. "And because in the 3 months I've studied you, I've come to care about what happens to you." A weak smile touched her lips. A scientist shouldn't become emotionally attached to their research subject. "I think we're well beyond that particular ethical guideline now," Ethan replied with a grim chuckle, returning to his work. The next few hours were a race against time, using data he'd collected during his research on Solari bioenergetics. Ethan programmed the station's generators to produce energy that mimicked Aloria's signature frequency. It wasn't perfect, lacking the spiritual component that the Solari insisted was crucial, but he hoped the physical properties would be similar enough to sustain Valera's basic functions. As night fell over the mainland, casting the laboratory in shadows broken only by the glow of equipment and Valera's faintly pulsing skin, Ethan completed the final calibrations. "This is going to feel strange," he warned her, hovering his hand over the activation control, "possibly painful, but if it works, it should stabilize your condition." Valera nodded weakly. "I trust you." The words, simple yet profound, coming from someone who had every reason to distrust, struck Ethan deeply. He activated the system. Energy flowed from the generators into Valera's body through specialized conduits. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she gasped, her back arching as the synthetic energy coursed through her system. The crimson threads in her skin flared brilliantly, seeming to absorb and process the energy in ways Ethan hadn't predicted. Alarmed, he moved to shut down the system, but Valera raised a hand to stop him. "No," she managed through gritted teeth. "It's working. Differently, but working." The diagnostic displays confirmed her assessment. Though her body was processing the energy in unexpected ways, her cellular stability was improving. The crimson pathways that had always been treated as a defect were actually adapting to the synthetic energy more efficiently than normal Solari physiology would have. Remarkable. Ethan murmured, watching the readings. Your blood mark isn't a defect at all. It's an adaptation, perhaps even an evolution. As the initial shock of the energy infusion subsided, Valera relaxed, her breathing becoming more regular. Color returned to her skin, the natural luminescence of the Solari strengthening, though still interwoven with the distinctive crimson pattern. How do you feel? Ethan asked, scanning her vitals. Like I've been reborn, she replied, her voice stronger than before. The energy is different, raw, more primal than what I'm used to, but somehow it feels right. She raised her hand, examining the crimson pathways that now pulsed with renewed vigor, as if this is what my body was always meant to process. Ethan made notes on his data pad, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his concern. This could explain why you've always been different. The standard Solari connection to Eloria's energy was actually suppressing your natural abilities rather than supporting them. A chime from the communication console interrupted them. Ethan checked the identifier and frowned. It's Dr. Marr, he said, glancing at Valera. I have to answer or she'll suspect something is wrong. Valera nodded, though tension returned to her features. Ethan accepted the transmission, positioning himself so that the camera would not capture Valera in the background. Dr. Celine Marr's stern face appeared on the screen, her expression more severe than usual. Dr. Carter, she began without preamble, I've been attempting to contact you for hours. There's been an incident involving your research subject. I'm aware, Ethan replied carefully. High Priest Arthon conducted an expulsion ceremony. Celine's eyes narrowed. Then you understand the sensitivity of the situation. The committee has been in emergency session since the ceremony concluded. Arthon claims the morning's energy manifestation was a divine directive, but our scientists have detected signs of manipulation. We believe he engineered the event to eliminate Valera before our research could be completed. And what is the committee doing about this? Ethan asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Politics requires careful navigation. Dr. Carter, Celine replied stiffly, we are preparing a formal protest, but in the meantime search teams have been dispatched to recover Valera's remains. It would be problematic if evidence of temple interference were to disappear. You're treating her death as a political opportunity, Ethan said flatly. Celine's expression tightened. I'm treating it as the tragedy it is, while also ensuring it serves some purpose. The committee genuinely valued Valera's contribution to our understanding of Solari physiology, but not enough to prevent her expulsion. We were outmaneuvered, Celine admitted, a flash of genuine regret crossing her features. By the time we understood what was happening, the ceremony was already underway. Interference would have caused a citywide crisis. She hesitated, then added more softly, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Ethan, I know you had developed a connection with the subject. Before Ethan could respond, the transmission was interrupted by a priority alert. Celine looked away, responding to someone off-screen. When she returned her attention to Ethan, her composure had slipped further. The situation has escalated, she said tersely. Arthon is claiming that Valera's expulsion was necessary because she harbored an ancient corruption, something called the Chronobeast energy. It's a myth from early Solari history, but his invocation of it has stirred public fear. Riots have broken out in the lower districts between religious fundamentalists and scientific progressives. Ethan glanced briefly at Valera, who had gone very still at the mention of the Chronobeast. What exactly is this Chronobeast supposed to be? He asked, returning his attention to Celine. A legendary entity from before the Ascension, when Solari still dwelled on the surface. Celine explained impatiently. It supposedly existed outside normal time and fed on energy itself. Religious texts claim it nearly destroyed our ancestors before they contained it through sacred rituals. She shook her head. It's superstitious nonsense, but politically powerful. Arthon is positioning himself as having saved Eloria from its return. And the committee's response? We're countering with science, of course, but in times of fear, people often prefer comforting myths to complex truths. Celine's expression hardened. Your presence at tomorrow's emergency council would be valuable. Dr. Carter, your data on Violira could help demonstrate that her condition was biological, not supernatural. I'll consider it, Ethan replied non-committally. Celine studied him for a moment, suspicion evident in her gaze. Where are you now, Doctor? Your locator shows you at the research station, but you were last seen in Eloria's lower districts. I returned to review my data, Ethan said, the half-truth coming easily. After hearing about Valira's expulsion, I wanted to analyze her most recent readings. I see. Celine didn't sound convinced. Report to the committee chambers at first light tomorrow. Your insights will be crucial. Her image flickered, then added, and Ethan, if you know anything about Valira that you haven't shared, now would be the time. The political situation is volatile, and complete information is essential. The transmission ended before he could respond. Ethan turned to find Valira sitting upright on the diagnostic bed, her expression troubled. The chrono beast isn't a myth, she said quietly. At least, not entirely. Ethan moved closer. His scientific curiosity piqued despite the gravity of their situation. You know something about it? Violira raised her hand, examining the crimson pathways that pulsed beneath her skin. Only fragments, dreams and instincts I've never fully understood. The Solari histories taught in school mention the chrono beast as a parable about the dangers of uncontrolled energy. But in my isolation, I found older texts, pre-ascension records that told a different story. She slid from the bed, testing her strength, finding herself steady. She walked to the laboratory's viewing window, gazing out at the nighttime forest, her first view of the surface world in full consciousness. According to those ancient accounts, the chrono beast wasn't a monster. It was a symbiotic energy entity that bonded with certain Solari, granting them abilities beyond our normal capacity. She turned back to Ethan, her eyes reflecting the crimson energy within her. The texts claimed these symbiotic Solari could manipulate time in limited ways and channel raw energy directly, without technological mediation. And you think that's what your blood mark is? Ethan asked, fascinated. A genetic remnant of this symbiosis? I don't know, Valira admitted, but since receiving your synthetic energy, I've felt awakened somehow, as if parts of me that were dormant are now stirring. Ethan approached her, scanner in hand. May I? This could be crucial to understanding how to help you long-term. She nodded, allowing him to take new readings. The data that appeared made him inhale sharply. Your cellular structure is continuing to adapt, becoming more efficient at processing raw energy. And there's something else, temporal anomalies at the quantum level, as if parts of your cells are experiencing time slightly differently than others. He looked up from the scanner, excitement and concern warring in his expression. If the legends have any basis, in fact, your expulsion from Eloria's regulated energy grid might have inadvertently activated dormant abilities. Violira's expression shifted from wonder to alarm. If that's true, then Arthon was right to fear me, not for the reasons he claimed, but because I represent something the Church has spent centuries suppressing, the true nature of Solari potential. Before Ethan could respond, the research station's security system chimed, indicating an approaching aircraft. He moved quickly to the monitoring console. It's a Solari transport, he reported grimly. Scientific committee markings. They must have tracked the skimmer. Valira's momentary confidence faltered. They've come for me. Not necessarily. Ethan countered, though uncertainty colored his tone. But we can't take chances. He moved swiftly around the laboratory, gathering essential supplies and data storage devices. There's an emergency exit through the geological sample storage area. It leads to a cave system I've been mapping. We can use it to reach the coast, where I keep a secondary transport. As they prepared to flee, Ethan hesitated, looking at Violira intently. You should know. Leaving now means becoming fugitives. The committee has resources throughout the Lysara system, and without regular access to either Aloria's energy or my synthetic substitute, your condition could deteriorate again. Violira met his gaze steadily, the crimson light in her eyes strengthening with her resolve. I've spent my life in one form of captivity or another. Ethan, if I'm truly what the ancient text described, a chronosymbiont, then perhaps it's time I discovered what that means, beyond the constraints of Solari control. The sound of the transport landing outside urged them to action. Gathering the last of their supplies, they slipped through the concealed exit just as the main doors of the research station slid open, admitting Dr. Celine Marr and a team of committee scientists. As they navigated the dark passages of the cave system, guided only by the glow of Violira's skin and Ethan's portable light, neither spoke of the uncertainty that lay ahead, but in the silence between them grew a shared determination to uncover the truth about Violira's nature, and perhaps in doing so, challenge the foundations of Solari society itself. The cave system beneath Ethan's research station extended for miles, winding through the coastal bedrock in a complex network that predated Solari civilization on Lysara. As they made their way through the narrow passages, Violira's luminescence provided most of their light, the crimson threads in her skin pulsing stronger in the planet's natural environment. These tunnels feel familiar somehow, she murmured, trailing her fingers along the crystalline formations that occasionally protruded from the stone walls. As if I've walked here before. Ethan checked his mapping device, ensuring they remained on course toward the hidden cove, where his backup transport was docked. The geological composition is similar to parts of Aloria's foundation stone. Perhaps that's what you're sensing. Violira shook her head. It's more than that. There's energy here, old energy, different from what flows through Aloria. As if responding to her words, the crimson pathways in her skin brightened, sending small tendrils of light reaching toward a particular crystal formation. When her fingers made contact, the crystal illuminated from within, revealing intricate patterns etched into its surface. Ethan, she breathed, these are Solari symbols, ancient ones. He moved closer, examining the glowing markings, pre-ascension script, similar to fragments I've studied in historical archives, but more complete than any I've seen. It's a record, Violira translated slowly, her knowledge of the ancient language coming to her instinctively. A history of the chronosymbionts and their role in early Solari society. Her voice took on a rhythmic quality as she read aloud. When time flowed like water and energy sang in the void, the chosen of the chronobeast walked between moments, guardians of the balance. They were neither feared nor worshipped, but understood as necessary, the bridge between what is fixed and what may be changed. As she spoke, more crystals throughout the passage began to illuminate, revealing that the entire tunnel was inscribed with the ancient text. It was as if the words themselves had been waiting, dormant, for someone who could awaken them. This contradicts everything the Church of Sacred Energy teaches, Ethan noted, recording the illuminated text with his datapad. According to their doctrine, manipulation of energy outside sanctioned channels is corruption, because control of energy means control of the populace, Violira replied, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. The ascension, when our people took to the skies in Aloria, wasn't just a physical departure from the surface, it was a philosophical shift, a move toward centralized energy distribution. They continued deeper into the cave system, following the trail of illuminated crystals that seemed to activate in response to Violira's presence. The passage gradually widened, eventually opening into a vast underground chamber that took both their breaths away. The cavern stretched beyond the reach of their lights, its ceiling lost in darkness. But the space was far from empty. Crystalline structures rose from the floor like trees in a forest, each pulsing with a faint inner light that strengthened as Violira approached. At the center stood a circular platform of polished stone, marked with concentric rings of the same ancient script. "It's a temple," Ethan whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the enormous space. "Or perhaps a laboratory, a place where your ancestors studied the chrono-beast energy." Violira moved toward the central platform as if drawn by an invisible force. When she stepped onto it, the entire chamber surged with light. The crystalline structures blazed with energy, and the crimson pathways in her skin responded in kind, glowing so intensely that Ethan had to shield his eyes. "I can feel them," she said, her voice distant and resonant. "The chrono-symbionts who came before, their memories, their knowledge, it's here, preserved in the energy patterns of this place." Ethan watched in fascination and concern as Violira extended her arms, the crimson light flowing from her fingertips to connect with the nearest crystal formations. Her eyes had gone completely crimson now, no longer showing any trace of their normal Solari blue. "Violira," he called, uncertain if she could still hear him. "Be careful. We don't know what this energy might do to you." But she seemed beyond caution, immersed in communion with the ancient power that responded to her presence. Images began to form in the air around them, holographic projections, but created without technology, manifested directly from the energy Violira was channeling. They showed Solari from a bygone era, their forms similar to modern ones but with visible variations. Most notably, many displayed the same crimson energy pathways that marked Violira as different. These ancient Solari worked in harmony with humans and other species, channeling energy in ways that transformed the landscape, healed injuries, and even seemed to reverse decay in plants and animals. "They were healers," Violira said, her voice overlaid with echoes of others. "The chrono-symbionts used their connection to manipulate entropy itself, not to control or dominate, but to maintain balance." The images shifted, showing conflict erupting between different factions of Solari. Those who channeled the chrono-beast energy fought against others who wielded more conventional powers, their battle illuminating the skies with spectacular energy discharges. "The schism," Violira narrated, drawing knowledge directly from the ancient records. "When the priesthood decided that all energy must flow through sanctioned channels, controlled by the elite, they feared the independence of the chrono-symbionts, whose power came directly from the source. The holographic display showed the defeated chrono-symbionts being systematically imprisoned or executed. Finally, it depicted the construction of Eloria, the floating city designed with energy distribution systems that could be centrally controlled and that would suppress the specific frequency needed for chrono-symbiotic abilities to manifest. "The blood mark isn't a corruption," Violira concluded as the images faded, her voice returning to normal though her eyes still glowed crimson. "It's a heritage, one that was nearly eradicated by those who feared power they couldn't control." She stepped down from the platform, the intense illumination of the chamber dimming to a more comfortable level. Ethan moved to her side, steadying her as she swayed slightly from the exertion of channeling so much energy. "Are you all right?" he asked, scanning her with his medical device. "Better than all right," she replied, looking at her hands with wonder. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete, as if a missing piece of myself has been restored." Ethan's scanner confirmed her assessment, Her bioenergetic patterns had stabilized at a higher level than before. The crimson pathways now fully integrated with her normal Solari physiology rather than appearing as foreign elements. "This changes everything," he said, still processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. "The historical narrative that's shaped Solari society for centuries is based on deliberate suppression of your people's true nature. Not just suppression," Valera corrected grimly. "Genocide, the systematic elimination of an entire genetic line within the Solari species. Except..." She looked down at her glowing skin. Somehow, the trait survived. Dormant, perhaps, or diluted through generations, but never completely eradicated. A distant rumbling interrupted their conversation, followed by the faint sound of voices echoing through the tunnel system. "The committee found the hidden entrance," Ethan concluded, quickly gathering their belongings. "We need to move." Valera cast a longing look around the chamber. "There's so much more knowledge here, so much history to recover." "And we will," Ethan promised. "But first, we need to ensure our own survival. The cove is less than a kilometer from here, through the eastern passage." As they hurried toward the exit Ethan indicated, Valera placed her palm against one of the crystal formations. There was a brief surge of crimson energy, and then the entire chamber dimmed, the crystals returning to their dormant state. "A safeguard," she explained at Ethan's questioning look, "so they won't be able to access what we've seen here. The knowledge will wait for our return." They moved swiftly through the eastern passage, aware of the pursuit gaining ground behind them. Valera's newfound connection to the ancient energy had strengthened her physically, allowing her to keep pace with Ethan despite her recent ordeal. The tunnel gradually sloped upward, the stone floor giving way to sand as they approached the coastal exit. Daylight filtered through a narrow opening ahead, partially concealed by dense vegetation. "Almost there," Ethan encouraged, checking his locator. "The transport is hidden in a cove just beyond these rocks." As they emerged onto a small, secluded beach, the bright morning sunlight momentarily blinded them. When their vision cleared, they found themselves facing an unexpected obstacle. Dr. Celine Marr stood between them and the water, flanked by 4 committee scientists armed with energy restraints. Behind her, a sleek committee transport hovered just offshore. "Dr. Carter," Celine said, her tone a mix of disappointment and irritation. "I had hoped you would be more cooperative." Ethan moved slightly in front of Valera, though she no longer seemed as vulnerable as before. "The committee lost my cooperation when it failed to protect Valera from Arthon's machinations." "Politics requires compromise," Celine replied stiffly, "a concept you've clearly never mastered." Her gaze shifted to Valera, widening slightly at the changed quality of her luminescence. "What have you done to her?" "He hasn't done anything to me," Valera answered before Ethan could speak. "He simply helped me discover what was already there, what your committee and Arthon's church have both tried to suppress for centuries." Celine's expression tightened. "The Chrono Beast corruption, so Arthon was right after all." "Not corruption," Valera corrected. "Evolution, the natural development of Solari potential, free from artificial constraints. Whatever you call it, it clearly represents a significant bioenergetic anomaly," Celine said, her scientific interest momentarily overriding her official stance. "One that must be thoroughly studied under controlled conditions." She gestured to her team. "Secure both of them. We'll return to Eloria immediately." The scientists moved forward, energy restraints at the ready. Ethan tensed, preparing to resist despite the futility. But before anyone could act, Valera stepped forward, the crimson light in her veins pulsing with new intensity. "No," she said simply, raising her hand. A wave of energy radiated from her palm, not aggressive, but assertive, creating a barrier between them and Celine's team. The scientists froze, their restraints flickering and failing as the energy disrupted their function. Selene stared in shock. That's impossible. No Solari can project energy without technological mediation. No modern Solari, Veolera corrected, but I am connected to something older, something your committee has never fully understood. Taking advantage of the moment, Ethan activated his remote control, signaling his transport to emerge from its underwater hiding place. The sleek vessel broke the surface nearby, its hatch opening an invitation. This doesn't have to end in conflict, Dr. Marr, Ethan said, backing slowly toward the water with Veolera. What we've discovered could benefit all Solari, a lost heritage that bridges science and spirituality in ways neither the committee nor the church has imagined. Uncertainty flickered across Selene's features, a rare crack in her usually impenetrable professional facade. You're asking me to betray my position, my life's work. I'm asking you to consider that your work has been built on incomplete information, Ethan countered. There's an entire chapter of Solari history buried beneath our feet, one that challenges everything both the committee and the church believe. Selene hesitated, visibly torn between duty and scientific curiosity. Finally, she made a subtle gesture to her team, who lowered their disabled restraints. You have 24 hours, she said tersely. After that, I will be obligated to report your location and actions in full. Thank you, Ethan replied, genuinely surprised by this concession. As they boarded the transport, Veolera looked back at Selene. The blood mark isn't random, Dr. Marr, it follows genetic lines. You might want to investigate your own heritage more thoroughly. Selene's hand moved unconsciously to her collar, where the faintest hint of crimson could be seen at the edge of her otherwise normal Solari luminescence, a detail so subtle it was easy to overlook, especially when deliberately concealed. 24 hours, Selene repeated, avoiding Veolera's knowing gaze. Make them count. As the transport submerged, carrying them away from the beach and the committee team, Ethan turned to Veolera in amazement. Selene has the blood mark too? Just traces, Veolera confirmed. Probably dormant, like mine was until recently, but it explains her interest in my case, beyond mere scientific curiosity. She looked out through the transport's viewing port, at the underwater landscape of Lysara, seeing the planet's surface for the first time. The question is, how many others carry this heritage without knowing it, and what will happen when they discover the truth? Ethan programmed a course that would take them far from the research station, toward the remote southern continent where human presence was minimal and committee influence limited. First, we need to ensure you remain stable without access to either Aloria's grid or my laboratory equipment, he said, monitoring her bioenergetic readings on the transport's medical scanner. Then we can worry about revolutionary genetic revelations. Veolera smiled, the expression transforming her features in a way Ethan had rarely seen during their time in Aloria. Freedom, even uncertain freedom as fugitives, suited her. I think stability won't be an issue, she said, extending her hand toward the transport's power core. Crimson energy flowed from her fingertips, connecting with the vessel's systems immediately. All indicators showed a surge in efficiency and output. It seems I can draw energy directly from available sources now and return it improved. Ethan watched in fascination as she demonstrated this new ability, his scientific mind already cataloging the implications. But beyond the researcher in him, something else stirred, a profound respect for this remarkable being who had endured so much isolation and rejection, only to emerge stronger and more compassionate than those who had condemned her. Where exactly are we going? Veolera asked as the transport carried them swiftly through Lysara's coastal waters. Ethan showed her the navigation display. There's a settlement here, Haven Point. It was established by human researchers who chose to remain on Lysara after their official assignments ended. Over the years, it's become something of a sanctuary for scientific freethinkers. If anyone will understand and support what we've discovered, it's them. As they journeyed toward this potential refuge, neither spoke of the larger confrontation that surely lay ahead, with the committee, with High Priest Arthon, with the entire structure of Solari society that had maintained its power through the suppression of the very abilities Violira was now reclaiming. For this moment, it was enough to have escaped immediate danger and to be moving forward together, toward whatever future awaited them. The journey to Haven Point took nearly 2 days, during which Violira's connection to the Chrono Beast energy continued to strengthen. She practiced her newfound abilities in the confines of the transport, learning to manipulate energy with increasing precision and discovering, to her amazement, that she could indeed affect the flow of time in limited ways, accelerating the healing of a small cut on Ethan's hand, or temporarily suspending the decay of food they had brought from the research station. These experiments were as revelatory for Ethan as they were for Violira. His scientific training had never prepared him for direct observation of temporal manipulation, and he found himself constantly recalibrating his understanding of what was possible. "It challenges every fundamental law of physics I was taught," he remarked as they shared a meal in the transport's small cabin, watching Violira keep their food perfectly fresh with a gentle application of crimson energy. "And yet, seeing it performed so naturally by you makes me wonder how many other laws are simply limitations of our current understanding." Violira smiled, still finding joy in these small discoveries. The ancient texts spoke of harmony rather than control, working with the natural flow of energy and time rather than forcing them to obey rigid principles. Their conversation was interrupted by the transport's navigation system, announcing their approach to Haven Point. As they surfaced in a sheltered bay, the settlement came into view, a collection of structures that blended harmoniously with the coastal landscape, neither imposing upon nor hiding from the natural environment. "It's beautiful," Valera murmured, gazing through the viewing port at what would be her first real experience of life on Lysara's surface. Ethan guided the transport to a small dock extending from the shore. The original settlers were environmental scientists. They designed Haven Point to exist in balance with its surroundings, a philosophy that's guided the community ever since. As they disembarked, Violira hesitated momentarily before stepping onto the dock. This was her first time setting foot on solid ground outside of Aeloria or the cave system. The sensation was both disorienting and exhilarating, the subtle movement of the wood beneath her feet, the scent of salt water and vegetation carried on the breeze, the unfiltered sunlight warming her skin. "Welcome to real gravity," Ethan said with a smile, steadying her as she adjusted to the unfamiliar sensations. "No artificial stabilizers here." They were met at the shore by a small group of Haven Point residents, a diverse collection of humans and other species, their expressions curious but not hostile. At their head stood an elderly woman with keen eyes and weathered skin, her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Dr. Ethan Carter," she greeted him warmly. "It's been too long since your last visit." "Professor Lydia Ishikawa," Ethan replied, embracing her briefly. "Thank you for accepting my urgent request." The professor's gaze shifted to Violira, widening slightly at the sight of her crimson-threaded luminescence. "And this must be your Solari friend, the one you described in your transmission." "This is Violira," Ethan confirmed. "She's a chrono-symbiont," Lydia finished for him, surprising them both. "I never thought I'd live to see one in person." Violira stared at the human woman in astonishment. "You know about chrono-symbionts. How is that possible when even most Solari have forgotten?" Lydia gestured for them to follow her into the settlement. Haven Point was founded on the principle that knowledge should be preserved, not suppressed. We've spent decades studying Lysara's pre-ascension artifacts and records, including those pertaining to the chronobeast and its symbiotic relationship with certain Solari. As they walked through the settlement, Valera drew curious glances from residents, but none showed fear or revulsion at her appearance, a novel experience that left her both relieved and slightly disoriented. After a lifetime of being treated as either a pariah or a scientific curiosity, simple acceptance felt almost unnatural. Lydia led them to a comfortable dwelling overlooking the bay, its interior filled with books, specimens, and research equipment, the accumulated life's work of a dedicated scientist. "The committee believes the chronobeast was a mythological monster," Ethan said as they settled in Lydia's study, "and the church teaches that it was a corrupting force that nearly destroyed the Solari. Both convenient narratives for institutions seeking control," Lydia replied, retrieving an ancient artifact from a shelf, a small crystalline object similar to those they had seen in the cave system. "Our research suggests the chronobeast was neither monster nor corruption, but a naturally occurring energy entity that evolved alongside the Solari. Its symbiotic relationship with certain genetic lines granted abilities that helped early Solari civilization thrive in harmony with Lysara's unique environment." "But something changed," Valera said softly, her gaze fixed on the artifact that resonated faintly with the energy in her veins. "Power consolidated," Lydia confirmed. "As Solari society grew more complex, those who controlled energy distribution gained political advantage. The chrono-symbionts, with their direct connection to energy sources, represented a threat to centralized authority." "So they were eliminated," Ethan concluded grimly, "or at least, the attempt was made." Lydia nodded, her expression solemn. "The construction of Eloria was as much about control as it was about advancement. By creating a closed energy system and literally elevating themselves above the planet's surface, the new elite could regulate every aspect of Solari life, including genetics." Valera's hand unconsciously moved to her chest, where the crimson pathways converged over her heart. Yet somehow the trait survived. "Nature finds a way," Lydia said with a small smile, "especially when that nature is connected to an entity that exists partially outside normal temporal constraints." Their discussion continued into the evening, with Lydia sharing decades of research on pre-ascension Solari civilization and the true nature of the chronobeast. With each revelation, the picture became clearer. Valera wasn't a defect or an aberration, but a living link to her people's suppressed heritage. As night fell over Haven Point, Lydia offered them separate quarters to rest after their journey. But before they retired, she had one final piece of information to share. "You should know," she said gravely, "that your departure from Eloria has catalyzed significant unrest. Our communications network has intercepted reports of clashes between the church faction and committee supporters. High Priest Arthon is using your escape as evidence of the chronobeast's corrupting influence, claiming it has possessed both a Solari and a human." Ethan's expression darkened. "And the committee's response?" "Dr. Marr has taken a surprising position," Lydia replied, checking her datapad. "She's publicly challenging Arthon's narrative, suggesting that the bloodmark may be a natural genetic variation rather than corruption. It's causing quite the theological and scientific debate." "Celine kept her word," Valera murmured, impressed despite her lingering distrust of the committee scientist. "She's giving us time." "But not much," Lydia cautioned. "Both factions are mobilizing search parties. Haven Point can offer temporary sanctuary, but eventually they will find you here." Ethan exchanged a look with Valera, unspoken understanding passing between them. "Then we need to use this time wisely. If Arthon is framing this as a spiritual battle and Celine is approaching it scientifically, neither is addressing the full truth." "Which is?" Lydia prompted, though her knowing expression suggested she already anticipated the answer. That this isn't about corruption or genetic variation, Valera said, the crimson light in her eyes intensifying with conviction. It's about freedom. The freedom of Solari to connect with energy directly, without institutional mediation. And that threatens the foundation of both the church and the committee. A dangerous position, Lydia observed, one that makes you enemies on all sides. Perhaps, Ethan acknowledged, but also one that might resonate with ordinary Solari who've never questioned why they need priests or scientists to access the energy that sustains them. As they retired for the night, the weight of their discovery and its implications settled over them. What had begun as a rescue, Ethan saving Valera from certain death in the dead zone, had evolved into something far more significant, a potential revolution in Solari society, challenging centuries of established power and control. Valera stood at the window of her assigned quarters, gazing up at Aeloria visible as a distant, luminous shape among the stars. Despite everything she had suffered there, it was still home, the only one she had ever known. The thought that she might never return filled her with a complex mixture of liberation and loss. A soft knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. She opened it to find Ethan, his expression troubled. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too many thoughts about what comes next." "I know the feeling," she replied, inviting him in with a gesture. "Everything has changed so quickly. 3 days ago, I was a prisoner in my own society. Now I'm the living embodiment of a truth that could transform that society," Ethan finished for her. They stood together by the window, the night breeze carrying the unfamiliar but pleasant scents of the surface world. "Why did you really come to Lysara, Ethan?" Valera asked suddenly. "Of all the researchers who could have been sent to study Solari bioenergetics, why you?" He was silent for a long moment before answering. "My official assignment was to research potential applications of Solari energy technology for human benefit. But personally," he hesitated, then continued more softly, "I came because I've always been drawn to the spaces between established knowledge, the anomalies and exceptions that reveal deeper truths. When I read about a Solari with aberrant energy patterns being studied by the committee, I requested the assignment specifically." "You came looking for me," Valera realized. "For what you represented," Ethan clarified. "A challenge to the neat categories of Solari physiology. I never expected—" He trailed off, looking at her with an expression that conveyed more than words could. "Never expected to risk everything to save me?" she suggested, a small smile playing at her lips. "Never expected to become a fugitive from both the church and the committee?" "Never expected to care so much," he said simply. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Valera reached out, her luminescent hand with its crimson pathways covering his human one. Where they touched, a subtle glow emerged, not just from her, but a resonance between them, as if the energy she channeled recognized something kindred in him. "The ancient texts speak of human Solari partnerships," she said softly. "Not just diplomatic or scientific collaborations, but deeper connections. The chronobeast energy supposedly responded to emotional bonds, strengthening when shared between connected souls." "Is that what's happening here?" Ethan asked, watching the gentle illumination where their hands met. "I don't know," Valera admitted, "but I do know that without you, I would have died in the dead zone, never discovering who and what I truly am, and that creates a bond that transcends ordinary gratitude." Their moment of connection was interrupted by a sudden alarm blaring throughout Haven Point. They rushed outside to find the settlement in controlled but urgent motion, residents securing equipment and moving toward designated safety areas. Lydia approached them, her expression grim. Multiple aircraft approaching from the north, Aeloria signatures, both church and committee vessels, moving in formation. How did they find us so quickly? Ethan demanded. Unknown, Lydia replied, but they'll be here within minutes. You need to decide now. Stay and face them, or continue running. Valeria and Ethan exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Then Valeria spoke, her voice steady with newfound conviction. Neither. We're not running anymore, but we're not making our stand here. Haven Point has shown us kindness and shouldn't suffer for it. She turned to Ethan. We need to return to Eloria. Return? He repeated, surprised. That's the last place. It's the only place this can end, she interrupted gently. The cave system showed us the truth of the past, but the future of the Solari must be decided in Eloria itself, where both the church and the committee must face what they've hidden for generations. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, a direct confrontation. At the Temple of Sacred Energy, Valeria confirmed, during the convergence ceremony, when all of Eloria will be watching. That's in less than 20 hours, Lydia noted, checking her data. And it's suicide. Arthon will have the full power of the city's energy grid at his command during the ceremony. Good, Valeria said, the crimson light in her veins pulsing with determination. Let him draw all the energy he can. It will make what I have to show them all the more dramatic by comparison. As the sounds of approaching aircraft grew louder, they moved swiftly to prepare. Ethan gathered essential equipment while Lydia provided them with data on Eloria's security systems and a small but powerful communications device. This will broadcast on all Solari frequencies, she explained, pressing it into Valera's hand. Whatever truth you reveal, all of Eloria will hear it. They said their hasty goodbyes as they returned to the transport. Just as they were about to depart, Lydia gripped Valera's arm, her expression intense. Remember, she said urgently, the Chrono Beast was never about destruction or dominance. Its true power was harmony, bringing balance to energies in conflict. Whatever happens in the temple, hold to that truth. Valeria nodded, embracing the elderly scientist briefly before joining Ethan in the transport. As they submerged and accelerated away from Haven Point, the first Solari vessels were visible on the horizon, their searchlights sweeping the shoreline. They'll be fine, Ethan assured her, noting her concerned glance back toward the settlement. Haven Point has survived scrutiny before, but are you sure about this plan? Returning to Eloria, confronting Arthon at the height of his power? Valeria looked down at her hands, where the crimson energy flowed with new purpose and control. For generations, my people have been denied their true heritage, the direct connection to energy that was our birthright. They live in a beautiful cage, dependent on either priests or scientists to access what should flow freely. It's time they learned the truth, whatever the personal cost. As the transport carried them swiftly through Lysara's waters, back toward the floating city that had rejected her, Valeria felt a strange sense of peace despite the danger ahead. For the first time in her life, she was moving toward something rather than simply enduring what was done to her. Whether their mission ended in transformation or tragedy, she would face it as her true self, a chrono-symbiont, the living bridge between past and future. The journey back to Eloria was tense but uneventful. Most of the search vessels had been deployed to scan the southern coastal regions where Haven Point was located, leaving their path relatively clear. Ethan piloted the transport with careful precision, using the planet's magnetic anomalies to mask their approach. As they neared the floating city, its magnificent crystalline structures came into view, glittering in the light of the twin moons that were rapidly approaching convergence. From this distance, Eloria appeared as perfect and serene as it did in official imagery, a testament to Solari achievement and harmony. The dark undercurrents of control and suppression remained invisible to the casual observer. The security grid will detect us if we approach directly, Ethan noted, checking the transport sensors, and all official entry points will be monitored. Violira studied the city's underbelly, where maintenance systems and waste management units were located. There's another way. During my years in isolation, I studied the structural plans of Eloria, one of the few databases I was permitted to access. There's a maintenance shaft near the purification systems that's rarely monitored. It was designed for emergency repairs during energy fluctuations. Ethan adjusted their course accordingly, bringing the transport into position beneath the indicated section of the floating city. The shaft was indeed there, a narrow vertical tunnel extending from the underside of Eloria toward its core. "It's going to be tight," he observed, examining the dimensions, "and will need to ascend without power once inside. The energy signature would trigger alarms." "We won't need mechanical power," Valera replied, the crimson light in her veins pulsing with confidence. "The chrono-symbiont energy can propel us, and it won't register on Eloria's standard detection systems." After securing the transport in a concealed position, they equipped themselves with only the essentials: Ethan's compact medical kit, the communications device from Lydia, and a small data pad containing the information they had gathered about Solari history and the Chrono Beast. The maintenance shaft was as narrow as Ethan had feared, barely wide enough for them to ascend single file. Once inside, Violera took the lead, her crimson energy extending around them like a protective cocoon. With a subtle manipulation of forces that defied standard physics, she lifted them upward through the shaft, bypassing security checkpoints through sections that had long been forgotten in Eloria's maintenance protocols. They emerged in a dimly lit service corridor deep within the city's infrastructure level. The hum of Eloria's energy grid surrounded them, flowing through conduits embedded in the walls. "We're directly beneath the temple district," Valera whispered, orienting herself through her innate connection to the city's energy patterns. "The convergence ceremony will begin in approximately 4 hours, when the moons align at their zenith." "What exactly happens during this ceremony?" Ethan asked as they moved cautiously through the corridor, avoiding the automated maintenance drones that occasionally passed. "Traditionally, it's when the High Priest channels the combined energy of both moons through Eloria's grid," Valera explained, her voice low. "The energy is then distributed to all citizens, supposedly as a blessing that purifies and strengthens them. In reality, it's the most visible demonstration of the Church's control over energy access. During the ceremony, every Solari feels their dependencies on the centralized system." "And that's when you want to make your stand," Ethan confirmed, concern evident in his expression. "When Arthon is at his most powerful?" Violera nodded. "And when all of Eloria is watching, the convergence is broadcast throughout the city. No one misses it." They continued through the labyrinthine infrastructure level, Violera guiding them with unerring precision. Her connection to the city's energy grid, though severed during her expulsion, seemed to have been replaced by a deeper awareness of energy flows, one that operated outside the controlled channels established by the Church and Committee. As they approached a junction, voices echoed from an adjacent corridor. They pressed themselves against the wall, waiting as a maintenance crew passed by, discussing preparations for the ceremony. "Never seen security this tight," one worker was saying. "Committee guards at every entrance to the temple district." "After what happened with the marked one, can you blame them?" another replied. "Arthon's claiming she's fully corrupted now, possessed by the Chrono Beast itself." "You believe that?" "My cousin works in the scientific quarter. Says it's all superstitious nonsense, just genetic variation, not corruption." "Well, someone's lying, and I'd rather not discover which one during the convergence." The workers moved on, their voices fading. Ethan glanced at Valera, who had gone very still. "Are you all right?" he whispered. "It's strange," she replied softly. "All my life, I've been discussed as an abstraction, the marked one, the aberration, the research subject, Never just Valera. She met his gaze. Until you came. Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Well, Valera, shall we go change the course of Solari history? A smile touched her lips, the crimson light in her eyes brightening with determination. Let's. They continued their journey upward through the city, using service passages and maintenance shafts to avoid detection. As they ascended, the infrastructure became more refined, the utilitarian design of the lower levels giving way to the aesthetic precision for which Eloria was renowned. Eventually, they reached a small access panel that, according to Valera's knowledge of the city's layout, opened into a storage chamber adjacent to the temple's outer sanctum. They paused there, preparing for the final phase of their approach. Once we enter the temple district, we'll have minutes at most before we're detected, Ethan warned, checking their meager equipment one last time. The ceremony doesn't begin for nearly 3 hours. Where can we hide until then? Valera considered the question, her expression thoughtful. There's one place they wouldn't think to look for me, the reliquary. It's a chamber beneath the main temple floor where ancient artifacts are stored. Few have access, but... She hesitated, then continued. Ria works there. She was my friend, before my mark became too pronounced to hide. Can she be trusted? Ethan asked cautiously. I don't know, Valera admitted, but she was kind to me when others weren't. It's our best option. With that decided, they carefully opened the access panel and slipped into the storage chamber beyond. It was filled with ceremonial items, ornate vessels, energy conductors, and decorative elements used during major temple events. The convergence would require all of these, and preparations were clearly underway, but the chamber itself was momentarily empty. They moved swiftly to the door, Valera extending her senses to check for presences beyond. 2 acolytes in the corridor, she whispered, moving away from us. When the corridor was clear, they emerged, immediately adopting the purposeful stride of those with legitimate business in the temple. Valera led them through a series of increasingly ornate passages, the architecture growing more elaborate as they approached the sacred heart of Eloria. They encountered several priests and temple workers, but Ethan had donned a researcher's robe from the storage chamber, and Valera kept her head down, the hood of a borrowed ceremonial cloak concealing her distinctive features. In the pre-ceremony bustle, 2 more workers went unremarked. The entrance to the reliquary was hidden behind a decorative panel in a quiet alcove. Valera placed her palm against it, sending a pulse of energy through the locking mechanism. For a moment, nothing happened, and she feared her access had been completely purged from Eloria's systems. Then, responding perhaps to the unique signature of her chrono-symbiont energy rather than her official identity, the panel slid open. The narrow staircase beyond descended steeply into darkness. They entered quickly, the panel closing behind them, and made their way down by the light of Valera's luminescence. The reliquary opened before them, a vast circular chamber lined with storage units containing artifacts from throughout Solari history. At the center stood a workstation where a slender female Solari was carefully examining an ancient crystal formation similar to those they had seen in the cave system. She looked up sharply at their entrance, her luminescent blue eyes widening in shock. Valera, she gasped, rising to her feet. How? They said you were dead. Hello, Ria, Valera greeted her former friend cautiously. I nearly was. Ria's gaze darted to Ethan, then back to Valera, taking in the changed quality of her luminescence, the crimson pathways now strong and integrated rather than appearing as foreign elements. The blood mark, she murmured. It's different now, more harmonious. Because it's not a corruption, Valera explained, approaching slowly. It never was. It's a connection to something the church and committee have hidden from our people for generations. Ria's expression was a complex mixture of fear, confusion, and fascination. Arthon says you've been possessed by the Chrono Beast. The entire city is on alert. There are guards everywhere, security protocols I've never seen before. She hesitated, then asked the crucial question, "Why have you come back? They'll kill you if they find you here." "Because the truth needs to be told," Valera replied simply. "About the Chrono Beast, about what the blood mark really signifies, about why our people have been kept dependent on controlled energy distribution." "And you think anyone will listen?" Ria challenged, though there was more concern than hostility in her tone. "Arthon has been preaching about corruption and purification for days. The population is terrified." "Fear thrives in ignorance," Ethan interjected gently. "We've discovered evidence of your people's true history, before Eloria, before the church's rise to power, evidence that challenges everything Solari have been taught for generations." Ria's attention shifted fully to him, her scientific training evident in her analytical gaze. "You're the human researcher, the one who disappeared when Valera was expelled." Her eyes narrowed. "The committee claims you've been corrupted as well." "The only corruption here is the suppression of truth," Ethan replied evenly. "Valera isn't a defect or an aberration. She's a chronosymbiont, a living link to abilities your ancestors possessed naturally, before they were systematically eliminated to consolidate power." Ria looked back at Valera, who stood with quiet dignity, the crimson light in her veins pulsing with steady confidence. Something in that calm certainty seemed to reach Ria, cutting through layers of indoctrination and fear. "Show me," she said finally. "Show me what you've discovered." For the next hour, they shared everything: the cave system with its ancient records, the true nature of the Chrono Beast as a symbiotic energy entity rather than a monster, the deliberate suppression of chrono-symbiont abilities during the construction of Eloria. Ethan provided scientific context from his research, while Valera demonstrated the harmonic energy manipulation she had recently mastered. When they finished, Ria sat in stunned silence, her worldview visibly realigning itself. "If this is true," she said at last, "then everything I've dedicated my life to studying has been filtered through lies." "Not lies exactly," Valera corrected gently. "Selective truths, preserved and presented to maintain the existing power structure. The artifacts you study here are real, but their context and meaning have been curated to support the church's narrative." "Like this," Ria said suddenly, retrieving the crystal formation she had been examining when they arrived. "It's always been described as a containment device, used to trap corrupted energy during the pre-ascension conflicts. But given what you've shown me—" She handed it to Valera. "What do you sense?" The moment Valera's fingers touched the crystal, it illuminated from within, responding to her chronosymbiont energy. Patterns appeared in its structure, the same ancient script they had seen in the cave system. "It's an amplifier," Valera translated, her eyes widening as she read the inscriptions. "Designed to harmonize the Chrono Beast energy with Eloria's power grid." She looked up at Ria in astonishment. This wasn't created to contain corruption. It was made to integrate the natural abilities of chronosymbionts with the technological systems of early Eloria, before the schism. "Before the church decided that all energy must flow through them," Ethan added, examining the crystal with scientific interest. "This could be crucial to our plan, if it can amplify your connection to the city's energy grid. Then during the convergence ceremony, when Arthon channels the moon's energy, I could demonstrate an alternative, direct connection without priestly mediation," Valera concluded, the plan taking clearer shape in her mind. Ria's expression grew troubled. "You're planning to interrupt the convergence ceremony? That would be unprecedented, sacrilegious, in the eyes of most citizens." which is precisely why it must be done, Valera said firmly. The ceremony perpetuates dependency and control. Our people deserve to know there's another way to connect with energy, their birthright, stolen generations ago. Ria was silent for a long moment, internal conflict evident in her features. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. The ceremony begins in 2 hours. Security will be checking everyone who enters the main temple, but there's another way in, through the historical archives adjacent to the reliquary. I can guide you. Relief washed over Valera. Thank you, Ria. Don't thank me yet, her friend replied grimly. What you're attempting could change Eloria forever, or get you both killed in the process. Either way, I'm now complicit. Despite her words, there was a spark of something like hope in her eyes. But if what you've shown me is true, perhaps change is long overdue. The next 2 hours passed in tense preparation. Ria provided them with ceremonial robes that would help them blend in with the temple attendants. Meanwhile, Valera worked with the crystal amplifier, attenuating her energy to harmonize with its ancient frequencies. Ethan prepared the communications device from Lydia, ensuring it was configured to broadcast across all Solari frequencies when activated. As the time for the ceremony approached, the temple above them came alive with activity. Through the reliquary ceiling, they could hear the movement of many feet and the solemn chanting that preceded major rituals. It's time, Ria announced, returning from a brief reconnaissance of the upper levels. The temple is filling with citizens. Arthon and the senior priests are preparing in the inner sanctum. She hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. Dr. Marr is present, along with the entire scientific committee. They've been given a place of honor near the energy focal, very unusual for a religious ceremony. Ethan and Valera exchanged concerned glances. That suggests collaboration rather than the conflict Lydia reported, Ethan noted. Perhaps they've reached some kind of agreement about how to handle the Chrono Beast threat. All the more reason to proceed, Valera said determinedly. If both institutions are uniting to suppress the truth, our demonstration becomes even more crucial. Ria led them through a hidden passage connecting the reliquary to the historical archives, a section of the temple rarely visited during ceremonies. From there, a service corridor provided access to the upper gallery of the main temple chamber, where they could observe without immediately being observed. The spectacle that greeted them was breathtaking. The temple's vast central chamber was filled with hundreds of Solari citizens, their natural luminescence creating a sea of soft blue light. Above, the domed ceiling had been rendered transparent, revealing the night sky where the twin moons of Lysara were approaching perfect alignment. At the chamber's center, a raised platform held the energy focal, an elaborate structure of crystals and conductors designed to channel and distribute power throughout the city. High Priest Arthon stood before the focal, resplendent in ceremonial robes that enhanced his natural luminescence to an almost blinding intensity. Flanking the platform were the scientific committee members, with Dr. Celine Marr prominently positioned nearest to Arthon, a visible symbol of unity between the two factions. They're making a show of solidarity, Ethan murmured. Whatever disagreements existed before, they've clearly decided that the Chrono Beast threat warrants a unified front. Valera's attention was fixed on the energy focal. The amplifier crystal will need to be placed within the focal's matrix to have maximum effect. I'll need to get closer. Not yet, Ria cautioned, drawing them deeper into the shadows of the gallery as a pair of temple guards passed nearby. Wait for the invocation. When Arthon begins to channel the convergence energy, all attention will be on him and the moons. That's your moment. They watched as the ceremony began, Arthon's resonant voice filling the temple as he led the assembled citizens in traditional chants. The scientific committee members remained silent but attentive, their presence lending academic authority to the religious proceedings, a powerful visual statement about the unified belief in controlled energy distribution. As the moons visibly drew closer to perfect alignment in the night sky above, Arthon raised his hands dramatically, his voice rising to a crescendo. Citizens of Eloria, witnesses to the sacred convergence, today we stand at a moment of both crisis and opportunity. The harmony of our society has been threatened by corruption. The ancient enemy our ancestors vanquished returns to test us. A murmur ran through the crowd, fear and anticipation mingling. Arthon continued, his voice taking on a darker tone. The marked one who dwelled among us, who some misguided souls defended as merely different rather than corrupted, has revealed her true nature. Possessed by the chrono beast, she now seeks to undermine the very foundations of our society, to bring chaos to our ordered existence by corrupting the sacred energy that sustains us all. Ethan tensed beside Vaelira, his hand moving protectively toward her. She touched his arm gently, her expression calm despite the vicious mischaracterization being broadcast throughout Eloria. But fear not, Arthon proclaimed, for in this time of convergence our power is at its peak. The Scientific Committee and the Church of Sacred Energy stand united in purpose to protect our way of life from those who would destroy it from within and without. At this, Dr. Marr stepped forward to stand beside Arthon, a planned gesture that sent another ripple of reaction through the assembled citizens. The sight of science and religion standing together in such visible harmony was clearly meant to reassure the population and reinforce the message of unified authority. Now, as the moons align, Arthon continued, we shall channel their combined power through our sacred grid, purifying and strengthening every true Solari who remains loyal to our ways. And in this purification, any trace of the chrono beast's corruption that may have taken root will be cleansed away. The twin moons reached perfect alignment, their combined light streaming down through the transparent dome to illuminate the energy focal. Arthon raised his hands toward the light, and the complex crystal structure began to pulse with power, drawing energy directly from the astronomical event. This is it, Rhea whispered urgently. All security attention is focused on protecting Arthon and the committee. If you're going to make your move, it must be now. Vaelira took a deep breath, centering herself as she had practiced. The crystal amplifier in her hand responded to her energy, glowing with increasing intensity as she attuned herself to its ancient frequencies. Stay here, she instructed Ethan. Be ready with the communications device. When I reach the focal, activate it so my words reach beyond this chamber. Vaelira, he began, concern evident in his voice. Trust me, she said simply, her eyes meeting his with quiet confidence. As I have trusted you. With that, she slipped away from their hiding place, moving with preternatural grace along the gallery's edge. Her ceremonial robes concealed her distinctive appearance as she descended toward the main floor of the temple, blending with the attendants stationed around the periphery. Meanwhile, on the central platform, Arthon had begun the formal invocation, his body glowing with the intensifying energy he was channeling from the converged moons. The energy focal behind him pulsed in response, its crystals aligning to distribute the power throughout Eloria's grid. By the sacred authority vested in me, Arthon intoned, I direct this convergence energy to flow through our blessed city, strengthening and purifying all who dwell within its embrace. The focal flared with brilliant light, and throughout the temple, the assembled Solari gasped as they felt the surge of energy flowing through the grid and into their bodies, the tangible demonstration of the Church's control over their most basic needs. It was at this precise moment that Vaelira made her move. Shedding the concealing robe, she stepped into the central aisle, her crimson-threaded luminescence immediately drawing all eyes in the chamber. A collective gasp of shock rippled through the crowd. "The corruption returns," Arthon shouted, his concentration on the energy channeling momentarily broken by her appearance. "Guards, seize the marked one." Temple security moved to intercept Violira, but she was faster, and now far more powerful than they anticipated. With a graceful gesture, she sent a wave of crimson energy outward, not to harm but to create space around her as she approached the central platform. "Citizens of Eloria," she called out, her voice strong and clear, "you have been told I am corrupted, possessed by an ancient evil. But ask yourselves, who has harmed anyone here, who has lived in isolation and suffering while others decided my fate?" From the gallery, Ethan activated the communications device, amplifying Violira's words throughout the city. In homes and public spaces across Eloria, Solari, who had not attended the ceremony in person, suddenly heard her voice, accompanied by the real-time images being broadcast from the temple. "I am not corrupted," Violira continued, advancing steadily toward the energy focal despite the chaos erupting around her. "I am awakened to a truth that has been hidden from all of us for generations. The blood mark is not a sign of impurity. It is a remnant of our true heritage, a direct connection to energy that requires no priestly intermediary, no scientific regulation." Arthon's face contorted with rage and fear. "Blasphemy," he shouted. "The corruption speaks through her. Do not listen to these lies." But Violira continued her approach, the crowd parting before her, some in fear, others in fascination. The guards who tried to intercept her found themselves gently but firmly moved aside by pulses of crimson energy that caused no harm but could not be resisted. "For centuries, you have been taught that energy must be controlled, regulated, distributed by authority," she called out, her gaze sweeping across the assembled citizens. "You have been made dependent on systems that can be withdrawn at the whim of those in power, as was done to me when I was cast into the dead zone to perish." She had nearly reached the platform now. Dr. Marr stood frozen, her scientific mind visibly struggling to process what she was witnessing. Energy manipulation without technological mediation, precisely what Solari society had deemed impossible for generations. "Look at what they fear so greatly," Valera challenged, raising her hands. The crimson energy flowed visibly through her veins, beautiful rather than frightening. Not corruption, but liberation, the ability to connect directly with the energy that sustains us all, without paying the price of obedience to either church or committee. With a final step, she ascended the platform, standing equidistant from Arthon and Celine, the living embodiment of what both institutions had sought to suppress. "No closer," Arthon commanded, gathering energy between his palms, no longer the benevolent distributor of blessings, but a man prepared to strike. "The convergence energy will destroy you, abomination." Violira's response was not what anyone expected. Instead of defending herself or attacking, she extended the crystal amplifier toward the energy focal, her expression serene. "I offer harmony, not conflict," she said, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to touch something deep within every Solari present. The integration of what was separated long ago, direct connection and technological distribution, working in balance rather than opposition. Before Arthon could stop her, she placed the amplifier crystal into an empty socket within the energy focal's matrix, a space that seemed designed precisely for it, though none had recognized its purpose for generations. The moment the crystal made contact, a transformation began. The focal's purely blue energy was suddenly infused with threads of crimson, mirroring the patterns in Violera's skin. But rather than corrupting or disrupting the flow, the crimson energy enhanced it, creating a harmonious blend that pulsed with unprecedented vitality. Throughout the temple, Kalari gasped as they felt the difference, energy flowing into them that felt more complete, more nourishing than anything they had experienced in their lifetimes. And most astonishing of all, for the first time in generations, they sensed the possibility of connecting directly with that energy, without institutional mediation. "This is what was taken from us," Valera said, her voice gentle but carrying clearly through the now silent chamber and across the citywide broadcast. "Not to protect us from corruption, but to ensure our dependency. The Chrono Beast was never a monster to be feared, but a symbiotic entity that enhanced our ancestors' natural abilities, abilities that threatened those who sought to control rather than serve." Arthon, seeing his authority literally being transformed before his eyes, made a desperate move. Gathering all the convergence energy he could channel, he directed a devastating blast toward Valera, enough power to destroy her where she stood. But the energy never reached its target. Instead, it flowed into the crimson pathways of her outstretched hands, absorbed and transformed rather than causing harm. For a moment, Valera glowed with an intensity that rivaled the converged moons themselves. The combined power of Arthon's attack and her own chrono-symbiont abilities, creating an awe-inspiring display. Then, with deliberate gentleness, she redirected the energy, not back at Arthon, but into the amplifier crystal. The focal flared with renewed brilliance, and throughout Eloria, every Solari felt a surge of vitality and awareness unlike anything in living memory. In that moment of clarity, as artificial barriers between them and energy itself temporarily dissolved, the truth of Valera's words became undeniable. They sensed the potential within themselves, the capacity for direct connection that had been systematically suppressed through selective breeding and controlled energy distribution. Arthon staggered backward, his attack having failed completely. The look of fear on his face was now unmistakable, not fear of corruption, but fear of irrelevance. If Solari could connect directly with energy, what need would they have for his church's mediation? On the other side of the platform, Dr. Celine Marr stood transfixed, her scientific worldview visibly crumbling in the face of what she was witnessing. Almost unconsciously, her hand moved to her collar, where the faint traces of her own suppressed blood mark had begun to respond to the harmonized energy filling the temple. "For too long, we have been divided," Valera continued, her voice steady despite the enormous energy she was channeling. "Those with the blood mark treated as aberrations, the knowledge of our true heritage buried beneath layers of superstition and pseudoscience. But today, during this convergence, we have the opportunity to heal that ancient wound, to reunite what was separated, and move forward as a whole people once again." She turned to face Arthon directly, her expression not triumphant but compassionate. "Your church need not end, High Priest, but it must transform from controller to teacher, from barrier to bridge. The sacred energy you revere is indeed sacred, but it belongs to all Solari, not just those who claim authority over it." Then she addressed Celine and the scientific committee. "And you, who claim to seek knowledge above all else, will you continue to ignore evidence that challenges your established theories? Or will you embrace the opportunity to explore the true potential of our species, beyond the artificial constraints imposed generations ago?" The temple remained silent, the assembled citizens and officials alike stunned by the demonstration of power and the radical truths being revealed. In homes and gathering places throughout Eloria, similar silence reigned as the population witnessed what many had believed impossible. Direct energy manipulation without technological mediation, performed not as an act of corruption, but of healing and integration. It was at this crucial moment that Ethan made his move, descending from the gallery to join Valera on the platform, as a human standing beside a Solari in the sacred heart of Eloria. His presence made its own powerful statement about cooperation and shared knowledge. What Violira offers is not the destruction of your society, he addressed the crowd, but its completion, the reunification of what was artificially separated. My research on Solari bioenergetics never found evidence of corruption in the blood mark, only adaptation and potential that had been systematically suppressed. A murmur began to spread through the temple, no longer of fear, but of awakening curiosity and hope. Citizens turned to one another, discussing what they had witnessed and felt during the harmonization of energies in the focal. Sensing the shift in the collective mood, Arthon made one final attempt to regain control. "Do not be deceived," he called out, his voice strained. "This display is merely a more sophisticated corruption. The Marked One seeks to undermine our sacred traditions, to destroy what generations have built." But his words fell flat in the face of what every Solari had experienced directly. The harmonized energy flowing through the grid had awakened something long dormant in their collective consciousness, a recognition of possibility beyond the limited scope they had been permitted to envision. It was Dr. Celine Marr who surprised everyone by speaking next. Stepping forward, she removed her hand from her collar, revealing the faint crimson traces that she had concealed throughout her career. "I have dedicated my life to Solari science," she said, her voice carrying the weight of profound personal revelation. "But today I must acknowledge that our research has been conducted within parameters designed to support predetermined conclusions." She looked directly at Violira. "The Marked One speaks truth. I have felt it in my own blood as the harmonized energy flowed through our grid." This admission from the head of the scientific committee sent shockwaves through the assembled citizens. If even Celine Marr, known for her unwavering dedication to established scientific doctrine, could acknowledge the validity of Violira's demonstration, then perhaps everything they had witnessed was indeed truth rather than corruption. Arthon looked around desperately, watching his authority crumble in real time. "This is treachery," he snarled, gathering the last reserves of his power for one final, desperate attack. But before he could release it, another voice spoke from the crowd, Rhea, stepping forward from where she had been watching. "High Priest," she called, her clear voice cutting through the tension, "in the reliquary beneath this temple lie artifacts that confirm everything Violira has shown us today. Ancient records of the chronosymbionts, evidence of the deliberate suppression of our people's true abilities, proof that the chronobeast was symbiotic rather than corrupting. As keeper of the historical records, I can no longer remain silent about what has been hidden." This was the final blow to Arthon's credibility. Throughout the temple, citizens began to call out questions, demanding answers about what had been concealed from them. The unified front of authority that had defined Solari society for generations was visibly fracturing, replaced by something more chaotic but also more vital, the beginning of genuine discourse and self-determination. Sensing defeat, Arthon lowered his hands, the energy he had gathered dissipating harmlessly. His face, once commanding and confident, now showed only the bitter recognition of inevitable change. "What happens now?" he asked, addressing Violira directly for the first time without condemnation or command. "Transformation," she replied simply. "Not destruction, but evolution. The reintegration of what was separated, direct connection and technological distribution, spiritual understanding and scientific inquiry, individual autonomy and collective welfare." She turned to address the assembled citizens, her gaze encompassing not just those physically present, but all of Eloria through the continuing broadcast. "This convergence marks not an ending, but a beginning. The path forward will not be simple or without challenge. Generations of conditioning and selective breeding have suppressed the blood mark in most of our population, but the potential remains, dormant within our genetic memory. With time, guidance, and the harmonized energy now flowing through our grid, that potential can be awakened, not to create a new elite, but to restore balance to our society. As she spoke, the energy focal continued to pulse with the blended blue and crimson light, distributing harmonized energy throughout Eloria. And in that light, something remarkable began to happen. Throughout the temple, faint crimson threads appeared in the luminescence of many Solari, dormant traits responding to the restored frequency, awakening after generations of suppression. "Look around you," Ethan urged the crowd. "What you're seeing is not corruption spreading, it's healing, the restoration of aspects of yourselves that were deliberately suppressed. Not everyone will manifest the full abilities of a chrono-symbiont like Violira, but each of you carries some portion of that heritage." The scene in the temple had transformed completely from the ordered ceremony that had begun an hour earlier, where fear and rigid tradition had reigned. Now curiosity and possibility flourished. Citizens approached the platform, asking questions, sharing their experiences of the harmonized energy. Even members of the scientific committee had broken ranks, engaging directly with the population rather than maintaining their usual authoritative distance. Only Arthon remained isolated, the collapse of his power leaving him temporarily adrift. Seeing this, Violira approached him, her expression compassionate rather than triumphant. "Your knowledge of the sacred energy remains valuable," she told him quietly, "but it must serve rather than control. Will you help guide our people through this transition, High Priest, or will you cling to what is passing away?" For a long moment, Arthon remained silent, the internal struggle evident in his features. Then, with what appeared to be enormous effort, he inclined his head slightly, not quite acceptance, but at least acknowledgement of the new reality. "The sacred energy persists, regardless of how it is channeled," he said stiffly. "If it has chosen this path for our people, who am I to oppose its will?" It was a theological rationalization rather than a genuine embrace of change, but it was enough for the moment, a foundation upon which new understanding might eventually be built. As the initial shock and wonder of the demonstration began to settle into more practical discussions, Ethan found himself drawn into conversations with the scientific committee members, explaining the research he and Violira had conducted and the evidence they had discovered in the ancient cave system. His unique perspective as a human observer of Solari society made his insights particularly valuable in this moment of transformation. Meanwhile, Violira found herself surrounded by ordinary citizens, many displaying newly awakened traces of the blood mark, all eager to understand what this meant for their future. She answered their questions with patience and honesty, neither minimizing the challenges ahead nor exaggerating the immediacy of change. "This is only the beginning," she explained to one anxious group. "Full reintegration of the chrono-symbiont abilities will take time, perhaps generations. But what matters is that we now move forward with complete knowledge of our heritage, rather than the selective truth that has constrained us for so long." As the night progressed and the converged moons began to separate in the sky above, the formal ceremony had been completely abandoned in favor of spontaneous discussion groups throughout the temple. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the space dissolved, replaced by circles of citizens, scientists, and even priests engaged in genuine dialogue. In this atmosphere of awakening, Violira and Ethan eventually found a moment to step aside, watching the transformation they had catalyzed unfold around them. "Did you imagine it would happen like this?" Ethan asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the semi-privacy of an alcove near the temple's edge. "Not exactly," Violira admitted, her luminescence pulsing with contentment as their fingers intertwined. "I expected more resistance, perhaps even violence, but I underestimated the power of direct experience. Once people felt the harmonized energy for themselves, conceptual arguments became irrelevant." "So what comes next?" he asked, his gaze taking in the animated discussions continuing throughout the temple. For Eloria, for you. Vaelira's expression grew thoughtful. For Eloria, a period of adjustment and rediscovery. The structures of both church and committee will need to transform to serve rather than control. New institutions will likely emerge to guide the awakening of dormant abilities. And for you? Ethan prompted gently when she paused. She turned to face him fully, the crimson light in her eyes soft but steady. For me? Freedom to choose. For the first time in my life, no longer defined solely by my difference or confined by others' fear. Her hand tightened around his, and perhaps, if you're willing, a partnership that bridges not just our two species, but past and future. I think I'd like that, Ethan replied, his smile reflecting the genuine connection that had grown between them through shared danger and discovery. Though I warn you, human Solari research collaborations can be quite intensive, lots of close observation required. Vaelira laughed, a sound of pure joy that few in Eloria had ever heard from her. I believe I can accommodate that research methodology, Dr. Carter. As dawn broke over Eloria, its light filtering through the temple's crystal dome to blend with the still harmonized energy of the focal. Vaelira and Ethan stood together at the threshold of a transformed society. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and challenge. But for the first time, it was a path chosen rather than imposed, by a woman who had been thrown away by her own kind, and the human who had stayed, no matter how broken she had seemed. In that moment of new beginning, as Eloria awakened to its first day of reunification with its suppressed heritage, Vaelira felt something she had never truly experienced before, belonging, not as an aberration to be tolerated or a subject to be studied, but as a whole being with both a past and a future, connected to her people and to the human beside her by bonds of shared purpose and genuine affection. The chrono beast energy that flowed through her veins was no longer a mark of separation but a bridge between what had been lost and what might yet be discovered, between individual potential and collective harmony, between a woman once discarded and a world now ready to embrace her truth. And in that embrace lay the promise of healing, not just for Vaelira, but for an entire civilization that had wounded itself through fear of its own deepest nature. The wound remained, its edges still tender after generations of denial. But now, at last, the process of true healing could begin.